The fluorescent lights above buzzed with a low, persistent hum, casting an eerie pallor across the prison's visiting hall. Rows of cold, metallic tables lined the room, each bolted firmly to the floor, as though even furniture here wasn't trusted to remain still. Guards stood like sentinels at the edges, their sharp eyes scanning the faces of inmates and their visitors. Conversations whispered in fragments, bits of apologies, promises, and Lysol carried by the stale air, heavy with disinfectant and desperation. At one table, a man named Marcus Kane sat rigid, his shackled hands resting awkwardly on the steel surface. He had the kind of face that told a story before he spoke, hard lines etched from years of anger and regret, eyes that flickered between violence and vulnerability. Across from him sat Evelyn, his wife of 7 years. She looked composed, even serene, her dark hair tied neatly, her hands folded as though in prayer. 7 years, Evelyn, Marcus said, his voice low and trembling. 7 years of loyalty, waiting for you every damn week in this place. His fists tightened against the cuffs. And you didn't think I'd ever find out? Evelyn shifted in her seat, her expression calm, but her pulse quickening. Marcus, she began, her tone firm but gentle. I wanted to tell you. I tried. He cut her off, his voice echoing harshly through the hall. The guard at the corner glanced over, but didn't intervene yet. You lied to me. You stood in front of me, called yourself my wife. And all this time. He stopped, his breath jagged, the weight of his realization pressing down like iron chains. Inside Marcus's mind, memories unraveled in brutal clarity. The first time he saw Evelyn, the letters they exchanged, the vows he believed in, now all of it stained with betrayal. His thoughts raced, spiraling into a storm that offered no escape. Was it all a joke? A performance? Did everyone else know but me? Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes pleading. I loved you, Marcus. That part was real. Everything we shared, it was real. But I was terrified you'd never accept me. Her words pierced the silence, but for Marcus they were poisoned arrows. He searched her face for answers, for some sign of the woman he thought he knew. But all he saw was a stranger sitting in her place. Rage coiled in his chest, venomous and suffocating. You let me rot in this cage while you carried a secret that big, Marcus muttered, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. And now you expect me to just understand. I expect you to see me, Evelyn whispered back. Her voice quivered, but her eyes were steady. Not the lie, not the fear, just me. For a fleeting second, something human flickered in Marcus's gaze, a fragment of the man he might have been if life hadn't carved him hollow. But the second vanished. The storm inside him broke free. The clang of a guard's baton against the floor snapped through the air. Keep it down, one officer barked. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. He was staring, frozen between disbelief and fury. His world collapsing, one fractured truth at a time. In the corner of the hall, another inmate murmured to his visitor, something bad's about to go down. No one knew just how right he was. The prison visiting hall slowly emptied, leaving behind the faint echo of footsteps and the metallic clang of doors locking shut. Marcus remained seated, his knuckles white from gripping the edge of the steel table. Evelyn had been escorted out by a guard, her head bowed but her posture still somehow unbroken. Marcus's breathing was uneven, jagged like shattered glass. He stared at the space where she had been sitting, as if her shadow still lingered in the air. He muttered to himself, words low enough for no one to hear. 7 years. 7 years of my life chained to a lie. What kind of man does that make me? What kind of fool? The guard, Officer Bradley, approached with a clipped tone. Time's up, Kane, let's go. Marcus rose slowly, chains rattling with every movement. His eyes flicked toward the doors where Evelyn had disappeared. Something inside him felt broken, and when he walked, it wasn't with the shuffle of a man bound by iron, but the deliberate steps of someone fueled by fury. Back in his cell, Marcus collapsed onto his cot, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Around him, the other inmates exchanged hushed conversations, whispers darting like moths to a flame. Word traveled fast inside those walls. Already, fragments of his confrontation with Evelyn were mutating into gossip. One inmate hissed, "Kane's old lady ain't who she says she is. No way." Another chuckled darkly. "Explains why she's always dressed like she's got secrets." Marcus shut his eyes, but their words burrowed under his skin, feeding the humiliation gnawing at his insides. Prison wasn't just about survival, it was about reputation. And now his had been shattered. "They'll laugh at me." Every last one of them. Sleep evaded him. Images spun wildly in his head. Evelyn's calm face, her steady voice, her confession echoing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. The memory felt like a knife twisting with every heartbeat. By dawn, Marcus sat up, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling not from weakness but from rage left unchecked. He whispered to the empty cell, "She thinks I'll just let this go. She thinks she can lie, and I'll swallow it like a fool." A knock rattled the bars. Officer Bradley appeared again. "Kane, you've got another visit." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Already?" Bradley smirked. "Guess your wife didn't get enough of you yesterday." The words landed like salt in an open wound. Marcus's pulse quickened. His fists clenched against the cuffs as the guard escorted him down the corridor, the metallic echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the walls. The visiting hall looked emptier this time. A single table at the far end waited, Evelyn seated calmly, her hands folded, just as before. She lifted her gaze as Marcus entered, her eyes steady but rimmed with exhaustion. He sat down hard, the chair screeching against the floor. For a long moment, silence hung between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Finally, Marcus leaned forward. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it trembled a storm. "Why come back? Why not just disappear and leave me with the pieces?" Evelyn swallowed, her voice soft. "Because I don't want you to remember me as a lie. I want you to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Marcus stared at her, his jaw clenched. Truth, to him, truth was already buried beneath years of deception. What Evelyn didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't seeking truth anymore. He was seeking retribution. Somewhere deep in his chest, a decision began to form, cold, final, and irreversible. The air in the visiting hall felt heavier than the day before, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension between Marcus and Evelyn. A flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the scratched steel table where they sat. Marcus leaned forward, his cuffs clinking softly against the tabletop. He studied Evelyn as though she were a puzzle with missing pieces. Her face looked tired, but her eyes, those calm, unflinching eyes, held the same quiet resolve. "You think you did me a favor." Marcus's voice was low, measured, each syllable dripping with venom. "You think confessing after 7 years makes you noble." Evelyn inhaled, her fingers tightening together. "It wasn't about being noble. It was about being honest. I couldn't keep carrying the lie." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Honest, you don't get to use that word. You built our life on a lie, Evelyn. Every kiss, every touch, every promise false." Her lips trembled, but she steadied herself. "I loved you, Marcus. That was never a lie." The words pierced him, but instead of softening, they twisted deeper into his rage. He slammed his palms against the table, the sound ricocheting through the hollow room. A nearby guard shifted, his hand resting on his belt. But Marcus leaned back again, forcing himself into stillness. "Talk control. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break inside." Though he was breaking, every memory of Evelyn was unraveling, rewriting itself in cruel detail. Their wedding day blurred into an image of a stranger standing at the altar. The nights they had spent whispering dreams into the dark now felt like a cruel performance. Evelyn's voice cut through his thoughts, quiet but steady. "I know you feel betrayed. I know you feel humiliated. But Marcus, I never wanted to hurt you." His eyes snapped to hers, burning. "You already did. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed me. Do you know what this means in here? Do you know what men like me become when the others find out?" She flinched at the venom in his words, and for the first time her mask slipped. A flicker of fear darted across her features. Marcus noticed it, and something inside him hardened. Silence stretched. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the faint scuff of the guard's boots on the concrete floor. Finally, Marcus leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "You've taken everything from me, Evelyn, and I don't forgive thieves." Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but the guard stepped forward. "Time's up." Marcus stood slowly, his chair screeching against the floor once again. He didn't take his eyes off Evelyn, not even as the guard tightened his grip on his arm. For the briefest moment, his lips curved into something resembling a smile. But it wasn't warmed, it was a warning. As he was led away, Evelyn sat frozen, staring at the empty chair across from her. For the first time, she felt a chill crawl up her spine, the weight of something inevitable pressing down on her. Marcus Kane was no longer just a man betrayed. He was a man who had decided what came next. The next visit began under a stormy sky. Rain hammered the prison windows, streaking the glass with distorted rivers of gray. The thunder outside seemed to echo the storm brewing inside Marcus Kane, shackled at the wrists. He was led into the visiting room like a predator straining against its leash. Evelyn was already there, sitting stiffly at the table. She had dressed with unusual care, modest blue blouse, hair pinned neatly, but her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She looked up as Marcus entered, and in that instant she saw it, the shift. Something colder lived in his gaze now, something that had been forged in silence after their last meeting. Marcus sat down slowly, the metal chair screeching. He didn't speak at first, only stared at her. Evelyn tried to steady her voice. "Marcus, I came today because I don't want this to end in hate. I want you to remember the good years. I want to believe that somewhere in you there's still love." His lips curved into a grim smile. Love, he spat the word like poison. You killed love the day you told me what you are. Her throat tightened. She leaned forward. I'm still me. I'm the person you laughed with, built dreams with. That doesn't disappear because of one truth. One truth. Marcus's voice rose, vibrating with fury. You lied to me every single day for 30 years. That's not one truth. That's 30 years of betrayal, 30 years of humiliation waiting to erupt. The guard by the wall shifted uneasily but stayed put. Marcus's mind raced, flashes of memory colliding with raw emotion. He could hear the whispers of inmates already mocking him, taunting him with Evelyn's secret. He felt stripped bare, less than a man. His fists clenched until his knuckles went white. Evelyn's voice quivered, but she didn't look away. I was afraid, Marcus. Afraid you'd never love me, if you knew. And for 30 years, I was right. Because the moment you learned, you stopped seeing me as your wife. You only see the lie. He slammed his cuffed fists onto the table so hard it rattled. Evelyn flinched, but Marcus leaned in close, his breath hot with rage. You don't get to play the victim. You tricked me into building a life on sand, and now it's crumbling. And when it crumbles, people get buried. A long silence followed. Evelyn's hands trembled in her lap, and she finally whispered, "What are you going to do?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He sat back, his face slipping into a chilling calm. You'll see. I'm not done with you, Evelyn. Not yet, the guard barked. Time. And yanked Marcus to his feet. But as Marcus was led away, his eyes locked on Evelyn's. There was no love there, no sorrow. Only the cold certainty of a decision already made. The storm outside raged louder, rattling the barred windows. Evelyn pressed her palms together on the table, trying to breathe. But a single truth settled into her gut with icy weight. Marcus Kane wasn't threatening her. He was promising her. The visiting room was quieter than usual that morning, as though the entire prison had drawn a breath and held it. Evelyn sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly, nails digging into her palms. Her heartbeat was uneven, loud in her own ears. She had almost not come, but something inside her said she had to. A final attempt, a last chance to reach Marcus before the darkness inside him consumed them both. When Marcus was led in, there was no storm outside, but the storm within him had not subsided. His walk was deliberate, his stare unwavering, like a man already carrying out a verdict only he understood. Evelyn noticed the difference, instantly, the absence of restraint. He sat down opposite her. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was suffocating. Evelyn broke first. Marcus, please. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You can still choose another way. Marcus's voice was low, but sharp as glass. Another way? For 30 years, I lived with a ghost. For 30 years, I called you my wife, touched you, trusted you, and now all I hear in this place is laughter. Do you know what it's like to be laughed at in here? His words pierced through the air like knives. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to hurt you. I wanted to protect us. You were happy, Marcus. We had a life. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. A life built on a lie isn't life, it's rot. And now, everyone knows. I walk through these halls, and I can hear the whispers. Marcus Kane, fooled by his own wife. Evelyn tried to reach across the table, but the guard's sharp cough reminded her of the distance. Still, her voice carried a desperate urgency. Please. You can survive this. We both can. What we had was real. Don't let anger erase that. Marcus's jaw tightened. His thoughts spun faster, the fury mixing with a strange kind of grief. Deep down, a sliver of him remembered the warmth of their early days, the laughter, the touch of her hand in his. But the weight of humiliation crushed those memories. He could not reconcile love with betrayal. Real, he whispered, almost to himself. Then his eyes hardened again. What's real is that you robbed me of choice. You decided for me what my life would be, who I would love, who I would trust. That's not love, Evelyn. That's a prison more cruel than these walls. Evelyn's tears slipped free. I was afraid you'd hate me. And now you do. But I'd rather you hate me for the truth than love me for a lie. I'm sorry, Marcus, truly. For a heartbeat, something flickered in Marcus's pause, a crack in the wall of rage. But then it sealed shut, harder than before. Sorry won't save you, he said flatly. The guard called time. Evelyn watched as Marcus was led away, his shoulders squared, his movements deliberate. She shivered, realizing that she had not spoken to a man wrestling with anger anymore. She had spoken to a man who had made a decision, and nothing could stop it. Her last words echoed in her own mind as the heavy door clanged shut. I'd rather you hate me for the truth than love me for a lie. The visiting room was nearly empty that day, just a few inmates with their loved ones. The hum of fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow across the linoleum floor. Evelyn sat stiffly at the steel table, her hands trembling as she waited. She told herself this was just another visit, but deep inside she felt the coil of dread, tight and unrelenting. Marcus entered, flanked by a guard. He looked calmer than usual, his expression unreadable. The guard gave him a searching glance, then walked back to his post near the door. Evelyn forced a weak smile. Marcus, she whispered. He sat opposite her, leaning forward slightly. Do you know how many times I replayed our life in my head this week? His voice was strangely calm, steady. Every kiss, every touch, every word. And do you know what I saw every time? Lies. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, please. It doesn't erase what we shared. It was real for me. It was real for you. His gaze burned into hers. You had 30 years to tell me. 30 years. Instead, you let me play the fool. Do you have any idea what that makes me in here? Evelyn shook her head quickly, trying to reach across the table, her voice cracking. No, Marcus, you're not a fool. You're a man I loved, still love. But Marcus pulled back, his jaw set, his breathing shallow. His thoughts roared louder than the prison around him. The laughter in the cell block, the whispers, the shame, every sound twisted into Evelyn's voice, lying to him. He couldn't separate her face from the ridicule. He muttered darkly. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't strip you of dignity. Before Evelyn could respond, his hand slid beneath the table. Evelyn's eyes widened as the glint of metal caught the harsh light. Somehow smuggled, hidden. Marcus had a shiv. She gasped, her voice breaking into a scream. The guard jolted, shouting, but Marcus was already moving. In one swift, feral lunge, he crossed the table. The blade flashed, slashing through years of anger, betrayal, and despair. Evelyn's scream echoed off the concrete walls before cutting short. Chaos erupted. The guard grabbed Marcus, wrestling him back, but the damage was done. Blood spread across the table, staining Evelyn's blouse, pooling on the cold floor. Her eyes, wide with shock, locked onto Marcus one last time. She tried to speak, but only a choked breath escaped. Marcus roared, not words, but pure agony, as the guard forced him down, cuffing him, pinning his face against the concrete. His breaths came in ragged gasps. She lied. 30 years. 30 years. Other inmates and visitors froze, some screaming, others backing away in horror. The room was pandemonium, yet in Marcus's mind there was silence, just the ringing aftermath of his act. Evelyn's hand twitched once on the steel table, then fell still. Her tears mixed with the blood beneath her body finally limp. The guard shouted for backup. Sirens wailed through the corridors as boots thundered closer. Marcus lay pinned, his face pressed to the floor, but his eyes stared unblinking at Evelyn. For the first time in weeks, his expression was strangely serene, as though he had silenced the laughter at last. But serenity bled quickly into emptiness, because in the silence after the chaos, Marcus realized the truth. Nothing he did could erase the 30 years of love or lies that bound them. And now both had ended in blood. The visiting room reeked of blood and panic. Sirens shrieked through the prison, bouncing off concrete walls as officers stormed in. Marcus lay pinned to the ground, wrists locked in cuffs, his cheek pressed into the sticky, red-streaked floor. His chest heaved, every breath shallow, ragged. Yet his eyes still fixed on Evelyn's lifeless form. A guard barked, his voice breaking through the chaos. 2 paramedics rushed in moments later, carrying a stretcher. They knelt by Evelyn's body, their gloves slick with her blood as they worked furiously. One pressed compresses to the wound, the other checked her pulse. Their faces turned grim. They exchanged a silent look that said everything. "She's gone," one whispered. The room seemed to inhale sharply, the noise falling away to a dreadful stillness. Evelyn's body was lifted carefully onto the stretcher, her blood dripping onto the floor in crimson streaks. Her eyes remained open, glassy, staring upward at the unforgiving fluorescent lights. Marcus twisted against the guards, his voice cracking. "Wait. No, she can't. Don't take her. She can't leave me like this." One of the officers shoved him forward. "You just killed her, Marcus. She's not leaving. You ended it." The words hit like a hammer. For the first time, Marcus's anger faltered. A hollow numbness spread through him. He tried to speak, but the words tangled, useless. His body sagged in the guard's grip, heavy with the weight of what he'd done. They dragged him out of the room, through corridors lined with prisoners, craning their necks to see the chaos. Murmurs rippled through the cell blocks, whispers laced with morbid curiosity. He killed her. In the visiting room, over 30 years of lies. In the warden's office, Marcus was thrown into a chair. His wrists remained cuffed, his knuckles scraped raw. Across from him, Detective Callahan adjusted his tie and studied Marcus with cool, piercing eyes. The detective had seen plenty of killers, but something about Marcus unsettled him. Rage mixed with heartbreak. "Tell me why," Callahan said softly, leaning forward. "You had a life together. 30 years. Why end it here, like this?" Marcus stared at the desk, his jaw trembling. Finally, his voice cracked, because every kiss, every night, every word it was all built on a lie. I was a fool. She made me one. And in here, being a fool is a death sentence. Callahan scribbled a note, his face unreadable. So you thought killing her would make you less of a fool? Marcus looked up, his eyes red, hollow. It was the only way to stop the laughter. The detective studied him for a long moment, then leaned back, exhaling slowly. He'd heard confessions before, but this one reeked of a tragedy bigger than murder of a man destroyed by pride, shame, and betrayal. Later, Marcus was marched back to solitary confinement. The heavy door clanged shut behind him, echoing like a death knell. Alone in the cell, he sat on the cold concrete floor, staring at his blood-stained hands. The silence was deafening. He whispered to himself, almost tenderly, "Evelyn." His voice cracked, his shoulders shook. For the first time since the truth had broken him, Marcus wept not. The courthouse in Montgomery stood like a fortress of justice, its marble columns glowing under the pale morning sun. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras clicking in a frenzy. The headline had already ignited across the nation. Inmate kills wife after discovering secret identity inside. The atmosphere was electric-packed gallery, whispered rumors, a trial that promised to peel open the darkest corners of betrayal, identity, and rage. Marcus was led in, shackled, his orange jumpsuit a violent contrast against the polished wood of the courtroom. His eyes darted toward the jury-boxed 12 strangers who would decide if he would live or die behind bars. Judge Harrison, stern and gray-haired, struck the gavel. Court is now in session. The state versus Marcus Blackwell. The prosecutor, Ms. Lillian Hayes, rose first. Tall, composed, her words carried the sharpness of a blade. She addressed the jury with calm fire. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about identity. It is not about secrets or betrayal. This case is about murder. Cold-blooded, premeditated murder. The defendant didn't just react in the heat of the moment. He chose violence in a secure facility in front of witnesses. He ended a life with brutality. Today, we ask you to deliver justice for Evelyn Carter. Her words settled heavy over the room. Then came the defense. A weary, sharp-eyed attorney named Robert Mercer stood, buttoning his suit. His voice was quieter, almost sorrowful, yet steady. This is not the story of a cold-blooded killer. This is the story of a man broken by a truth too heavy to carry. 30 years of his life, his marriage, his trust, his love was built on a foundation of lies. When that truth was revealed, Marcus Blackwell snapped. He did not plan this. He did not wait with intent. He was destroyed, and in his destruction, he lashed out. I ask you, when you hear the testimony, to remember he is not a monster. He is human, flawed, betrayed, and broken. The jury shifted uncomfortably, their faces masks of uncertainty. Witnesses were called. Guards recounted the chaos of the visiting room, their voices echoing the horror of blood on concrete. Paramedics described Evelyn's final moments. Each word painted Marcus darker, a man consumed by violence. But then, a surprise. Evelyn's sister, Marlene, took the stand. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at Marcus. My sister. She was terrified. She wanted to tell him the truth years ago, but she was afraid he would kill her. She lived in fear every day, Fear of this exact ending. The courtroom buzzed. Marcus lowered his head, his shoulders sagging, guilt spreading like a shadow. During cross-examination, Mercer pressed gently. Marlene, was it not true that despite this fear, Evelyn stayed with Marcus? For 30 years? Yes, she whispered. She loved him, even if it was a lie. She loved him. Those words twisted like a knife in Marcus's chest. He closed his eyes, hearing Evelyn's laughter, her voice, their shared nights. Could love survive under deception? Or was it all just smoke? When court adjourned for the day, Marcus was escorted out. Reporters shouted his name. Cameras flashed, but his face was blank, empty. Inside, he was unraveling, caught between the weight of his crime and the ghost of a love he couldn't fully condemn. The gavel had yet to decide his fate, but the verdict inside him was already clear: guilt, inescapable and eternal. The courtroom was hushed, a silence so thick it seemed to choke the air. Every seat was field journalists, law students, grieving family members, and curious onlookers who had followed the trial like a national spectacle. The case had become more than a story of murder. It was a mirror reflecting society's deepest fears and prejudices. Marcus sat at the defense table, his wrists cuffed, his face drawn with exhaustion. The orange jumpsuit clung to him like a second skin. His attorney, Robert Mercer, leaned close. "Whatever happens today, Marcus, know that I fought for you." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the jury box, on the 12 strangers who would decide his fate. Judge Harrison entered. The gavel struck. "This court is now in session. Jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with wire-rim glasses, stood. He held the slip of paper like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "We have, Your Honor. Please hand it to the bailiff." The paper was passed forward, and Judge Harrison read it silently before returning it to the foreman. "Please announce the verdict." The entire room leaned forward, breaths held in unison. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Blackwell, guilty of murder in the 2nd degree." The words detonated in Marcus's chest. He clenched his jaw, his knuckles white against the table. The gallery erupted. Some gasped, some wept, others scribbled furiously into notepad. Evelyn's sister buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Robert Mercer closed his eyes. 2nd degree. It wasn't premeditated, but it was still murder. The difference meant years, decades, not life without parole. Still, for Marcus, the weight felt crushing. Judge Harrison struck the gavel again. Order. Order in the court. Silence fell once more. Sentencing will proceed. The prosecutor rose, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the jury's decision, we cannot ignore the brutality of this crime. It was committed in a secure facility, in front of witnesses, against a woman who trusted him, Evan, under deception. We ask for the maximum sentence allowable under the law." Then Mercer stood, his tone softer, almost pleading. "Your Honor, Marcus Blackwell is not beyond redemption. He is a man who broke under a truth that shattered his world. This does not excuse his actions, but it explains them. I ask the court for mercy. Allow him the chance to rebuild, to atone." The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Marcus Blackwell, rise." Marcus stood, his chains clinking in the quiet room. The judge's voice rang like steel. This court sentences you to 30 years in the Alabama Department of Corrections. Gasps filled the air again. 30 years. Effectively, a life sentence for a man already past middle age. Marcus's knees weakened, but he did not fall. He simply stared straight ahead, hollow, as if the words had turned him to stone. The guards moved in, placing firm hands on his shoulders. As they led him out, he cast one last glance at Marlene. Their eyes locked. Hers burned with grief and anger. His with a strange, haunting emptiness. The cameras outside were waiting. The verdict flashed across every screen in America within minutes. The story of Marcus Blackwell had ended in the courtroom. But in living rooms, online forums, and whispered conversations across the nation, the debate raged on. Was he a murderer or a man destroyed by betrayal? The prison transport van rumbled along the highway, its siren echoing faintly in the distance. Inside, Marcus sat shackled, staring out through the tiny, barred window. The world outside was moving, on cars on the freeway, sunlight breaking through the clouds, people living lives untouched by his downfall. For Marcus, time had stopped. Back in the small town where it all began, the case had left scars. Evelyn's grave was covered in flowers, placed there by her sister and a handful of neighbors. But the whispers in the community never faded. Some mourned her as a tragic victim of a cruel crime. Others judged her deception, saying she bore responsibility for the violent end. Neither perspective brought comfort. Both carried pain in the prison yard. Weeks later, Marcus walked among other inmates. His once broad shoulders sagged, his face lined with regret. Conversations around him were filled with curiosity and speculation. "That's the guy," they whispered. "The one who killed his wife in the visiting room." He had become a legend. His crime retold like a cautionary tale, late at night, lying on his narrow cot. Marcus replayed the moment over and over, the revelation, the rage, the shot. He thought of the 30 years ahead, each one a reminder of what he had lost. Evelyn's face haunted him, not just in betrayal, but in the years of love they had shared, real or not. He would never know if any of it had been true, or if the entire marriage had been built on lies. That uncertainty gnawed at him more than the iron bars ever could. Marlene, Evelyn's sister, tried to rebuild her life. She appeared on news programs, speaking not only about her sister's death, but about the need for compassion, understanding, and honesty in relationships. Her voice trembled at times, but she became a quiet advocate for truth, warning others not to let secrets fester until they turned deadly. The world moved forward. The headlines faded, replaced by fresher tragedies and scandals. But in certain corners of the internet, the case remained alive, debated in forums, analyzed in podcasts, and dramatized in documentaries. Viewers consumed it with fascination, sitting in the dark, headphones on, listening to the tale of Marcus and Evelyn as though it were a work of fiction. But it wasn't. It had been to people's lives, torn apart by secrets and ended by violence. Years later, an aging Marcus stood by the window of his cell, watching a thunderstorm roll over the prison yard. The lightning flashed, illuminating the lines carved into his face. In that light, he no longer looked like the man who had once pulled the trigger. He looked like a ghost, haunted, a prisoner of his own choices. He whispered her name, Evelyn, into the darkness. For a fleeting moment, He swore he felt her near, her voice soft, her presence real. But it faded, leaving only silence broken by the distant clap of thunder. In the end, there were no victors, only echoes of love, deception, and violence that would never be undone. The story of Marcus and Evelyn became just another file in the archives of True Crime, one more tragedy in a world filled with them, one more warning that truth, no matter how painful, must always come before lies. The gavel had fallen, the verdict given, but the haunting lingered.